The sonar operator called it in twice before anyone believed him. The survey vessel was working a routine seabed mapping contract in the English Channel, charting shipping lanes for an infrastructure project that had nothing to do with history. Then the multi-beam sonar returned a shape that didn't belong on any chart of that stretch of seafloor. Long, narrow, cylindrical, resting upright in the silt at 210 feet. A conning tower still standing above the hull like a broken tooth. A submarine. Unmistakably a submarine. In water that, according to every wartime record anyone could locate, had never held one. The team leader, a marine surveyor named Julia Hartman, pulled up the coordinates and checked them twice against her own database of known wrecks in the region. Nothing matched. No listed loss. No historical marker, no fisherman's snag report going back decades. As far as any record was concerned, this stretch of seabed was empty. It wasn't until the ROV went down 2 days later, and the camera caught a corroded but legible number stenciled near the bow, that the mystery sharpened into something almost impossible to accept. U-672, a boat with a name, a boat with a documented fate. According to the official record, U-672 had been scuttled by her own crew decades earlier, in a location logged precisely, down to the minute and the coordinate, after a fatal encounter with an Allied warship. That location was 40 miles away. 40 miles is not a rounding error on a wartime chart. It is not the kind of distance a hull drifts after sinking. If this wreck really was U-672, then the official record, the one historians had relied on for generations, was wrong. And if it was wrong about something this basic, the question became inevitable. What else about her final hours had never actually happened the way it was written down? The ROV spent its first hours doing nothing but looking, and the wreck gave up its story slowly, the way wrecks always do. The hull lay canted at a slight angle, half swallowed by silt that had been building over it, grain by grain, for the better part of a century. Cold water and low light turned every pass of the camera into a narrow cone of gray, punctuated by sudden detail. A deck gun, still mounted, its barrel coated in a soft bloom of rust. A hatch, sealed. The conning tower's periscope housing, bent but intact, jutting upward like it was still watching for something on a surface that hadn't existed above it in 80 years. Marine growth had claimed most of the exterior, but where the current kept a section of hull clear, Hartman's team could make out flaking gray paint and, faintly, the ghost of an identification marking that matched wartime records for that class of boat. Every detail confirmed the same fact. This was a real, intact, identifiable World War II U-boat, and every detail deepened the same problem. It was not where history said it should be. "You expect a wreck to answer questions," Hartman said later. "This one only asked them." The conning tower hatch was closed, not blown open, not torn away by depth charges, but closed, the way a hatch is closed by someone still standing at it. That detail troubled the team more than any of the exterior damage. Boats destroyed in the chaos of a depth charge attack rarely end up with their hatches sealed with such apparent care. Hartman was not a military historian. She had spent 15 years surveying seabeds for cable routes and wind farm foundations, work defined by precision, patience, and an almost total absence of drama. She had found dozens of wrecks in her career, fishing boats, a scattering of merchant vessels, once a downed patrol aircraft nobody had ever officially reported missing. She had learned over those years to treat every one of them the same way, as someone's unfinished business, not as a curiosity. This one, she admitted, got under her skin differently. "A shipwreck usually tells you it was destroyed," she said. "This one felt like it had been put down, deliberately, somewhere it wasn't supposed to be for reasons nobody wrote down." She brought in a naval historian, Eric Solberg, who had spent 2 decades cataloging U-boat losses in the Channel and North Sea, cross-referencing Allied attack logs against German patrol records to build the most complete loss database he could manage. Solberg had cataloged U-672's fate years earlier from what seemed at the time like solid documentation: a depth charge attack by an Allied escort, a crew forced to abandon ship, a precise scuttling position logged by the attacking vessel's own record. He was not prepared to be told that record was wrong. "You build your whole career trusting these logs," Solberg said. You start to think of them as facts, not documents written by exhausted men in the middle of combat, sometimes hours after the fact, sometimes from memory. This wreck was the first time I really understood the difference. Solberg's research gave the wreck its human weight. U-672 had been a Type 7 sea boat, one of the workhorse submarines of the German U-boat fleet, commissioned in the early years of the war and crewed, like most of her class, by young men, many barely out of their teens, several on their first extended patrol. Her commander, according to surviving service records, was an experienced officer known among his peers for caution rather than aggression, a trait that had kept his boat and crew alive through patrols that claimed other commanders faster. On her final patrol, U-672 had been operating in the Channel approaches, part of a broader effort to disrupt Allied shipping in the lead-up to a major offensive. Radio logs from that period showed intermittent contact, then silence. An Allied escort vessel later reported engaging a U-boat, forcing it to the surface under sustained depth charge attack, and recorded the crew abandoning ship before the boat went down. 52 men were listed as recovered. No fatalities. On paper, it was one of the rarer stories from that stretch of the war, a crew that survived their own boat's destruction. But if the wreck now sitting 40 miles from that recorded position really was U-672, something about that story had to be incomplete. A submarine does not travel 40 miles on its own after her crew has abandoned her and she is already taking on water. Diving deeper into the wreck required a level of caution the team hadn't fully anticipated. At 210 feet, the site sat at the edge of safe range for mixed gas technical divers, and even the RO faced real constraints: a tether that could snag on the exposed deck gun, an unstable section of aft hull plating that had already partially collapsed and threatened further movement with each pass of current, and visibility that could drop to near zero within minutes if the vehicle's own thrusters disturbed the wrong section of silt. One dive had to be aborted entirely when the ROV's arm, attempting to clear debris from the forward hatch, triggered a small collapse of loose plating that very nearly trapped the vehicle against the hull. It cost the team 2 days of repositioning and recalibration before they were willing to attempt entry again. When they finally did, what they found through the forward hatch reframed the entire investigation. Inside the forward torpedo room, largely protected from the worst of the corrosion by the sealed compartment above it, silt had preserved fragments of a story nobody expected. A logbook. Its cover disintegrated, but its bound pages partially legible where they'd been compressed together, tightly enough to keep water from destroying every page. A sailor's identification tag, still readable, and wedged near a bunk, a small tin box, sealed shut by rust, that Solberg's team would later have carefully opened in a conservation lab rather than on site. That detail should not have been there. If the crew had abandoned ship in open water under fire, in the chaos the record described, personal items left behind should have been scattered, not carefully placed. Everything in that torpedo room looked less like the aftermath of a battle and more like a boat that had gone down slowly, calmly, with time for her crew to gather what mattered before they left her. The logbook, once stabilized and translated, told a very different final chapter than the Allied attack report had. According to the surviving entries, U-672 had not been destroyed in the engagement recorded by her attackers. She had been damaged badly, unable to dive safely, but her crew had kept her afloat and running on the surface for hours afterward, limping through the night on a heading that, cross-referenced against the logbook's final legible entries, led directly toward the coordinates where the wreck now sat. Piecing together the logbook, the ROV's physical evidence, and Solberg's cross-referenced patrol records, the investigators reconstructed a version of events that had never made it into any official file. The evidence suggests the Allied escort's report, filed in the confusion of a nighttime engagement and based on visual observation of a burning, smoking U-boat that appeared to be sinking, was an honest but mistaken account. U-672 had not gone down where she was reported lost. She had survived the attack, badly wounded, and her crew had spent the following hours trying to nurse her toward a rendezvous point, hoping to reach support before she failed completely. The most likely reconstruction is that flooding, slow but irreversible, finally overwhelmed the boat's pumps roughly 40 miles from where her attackers believed she had already sunk. Investigators believe the crew had time, enough time to gather logs, personal effects, and prepare an orderly abandonment rather than the desperate, chaotic escape the original record implied. This would explain the sealed hatch, the preserved compartment, and a survival record that had always seemed to historians like Solberg slightly too clean for the chaos it claimed to describe. The men survived, but the boat's true final hours, calm, deliberate, quietly desperate in a different way than anyone had assumed, had been erased from history the moment an exhausted attacking crew logged a location that turned out to be honestly, understandably, 40 miles wrong. The identification that closed the case for good came from the tin box recovered from the torpedo room. Inside, protected by a layer of oiled cloth, a set of photographs, and a folded letter, addressed in a young sailor's handwriting to a mother he never named beyond mutter. Cross-referenced against surviving crew rosters, the handwriting and a partial signature matched a name Solberg had already flagged as unusually well documented among the crew of U-672, a young radio operator whose family had preserved his letters for generations. Contacting that family, now 3 generations removed from the war, gave the wreck something no coordinate ever could. A face, a name, a mother who had waited for a letter that was, it turned out, still sitting in the boat the entire time, never sent 40 miles from where everyone believed it had gone down. The wreck of U-672 has since been documented and quietly marked as a protected site, her true position finally recorded correctly after 80 years of honest but mistaken history. The correction didn't change the outcome for the men aboard her. They lived, went home, and most are long gone now. Their story told and retold with a location that was never quite right. But it changed something for the family still holding fragments of that night, a letter that finally has a place it can be said to have come from, a mystery that finally has an ending that matches the evidence rather than the guess. The boat still rests where she finally went down, 40 miles from where every history book once placed her, her hatch closed the way someone left it, her silence undisturbed by the current that keeps slowly burying her a little deeper every year. Somewhere above her, the channel carries ships that have no reason to know what lies beneath their wake. For 80 years, the record was close enough to believe and wrong enough to matter. The wreck didn't just tell the truth about where U-672 went down. It told the truth about how easily history gets the ending right, and the details wrong, and how long the water is willing to wait before it corrects us. Somewhere right now there's another wreck like this one, unlogged, unmarked, waiting for someone to ask the right question. If you want to be there when the next one surfaces, subscribe. This is where those stories get told.